know the why human trafficking work is needed, to fight for the freedom of modern-day slaves. But love, passion, commitment isn't all you need to be an effective and successful anti-trafficking advocate. Learn the how. I'm Dr. Celia Williamson, Director of the Human Trafficking and Social Justice Institute at the University of Toledo. Welcome to the Emancipation Nation podcast, where I'll provide you with the latest and best methods, policy, and practice discussed by experienced experts in the field so that you can cut through the noise, save time, and be about the work of saving lives.
Welcome to the Emancipation Nation podcast. This is part 2 of an interesting interview with Sarah Ladd. First part talked about how she started with a study abroad course, saw children who she thought was being sexually abused, but it was a little bit more, discovered human trafficking or sex trafficking that was occurring, and then started to do her work by looking for ways to go back to school. She ended up going to law school and etc. I'll go back and listen to this episode, which is really interesting. We're going to continue on when Sarah gets to Ohio and what she does here in Ohio, and then moving on into Minnesota and more. It's a very interesting episode.
Yeah, so when I left Ohio, a few different things. Through my SCAD fellowship, they have some additional funds available if you want to try and write about your experience, what you learned through your work during your fellowship project. And so I was able to get a stipend to help me, give me some time and space to do some writing. So I actually published an article in the Journal of Human Trafficking about trauma-informed practices for accompanying human trafficking survivors. And so it's really, and I co-wrote that with Laurel Weaver, who's a trauma therapist there in Ohio. And she was part of my kind of core circle of collaborative partners in the casework and the outreach and the coalition work that we did in Northwest Ohio. And so we together wrote this article and really looked at so trauma-informed care is this buzzword. And this was now a number of years ago, but everybody says that we're doing this with trafficking survivors. But what are we really doing? What are the concrete practices that people either are doing or could do or that actually work? And what does research say about that? And what does practice say about that? And so that's one piece that I published. It was published in early 2018. And then in addition, when I moved here to Minnesota, I was able to initially volunteer, and then eventually I found some funding so that I could work for an organization called the Advocacy for Human Rights. I know they were mentioned in a previous podcast episode by my colleague, Caroline Palmer, who is also part of Safe Harbor here in Minnesota. I helped them to write a report about labor trafficking here in Minnesota. And as part of that, we developed some practical tools and then eventually some protocol guidelines for responding to labor trafficking also were developed more recently here in Minnesota. So those are good resources specifically on labor trafficking that I would highly recommend.
Yeah, that's excellent. And that article is really good that you did in the journal. And I have to take the time to say, yes, we do have an excellent Journal of Human Trafficking. It was formed with some colleagues of mine. The editor-in-chief is at the University of Nebraska. That journal has been in existence now for about 4 years. I believe it's the first international journal on human trafficking. It's a place where scholars can publish their work and we can move the science forward. And that was a really good article. And so where can people get a hold of this report about labor and sex trafficking and protocols and responses and that you guys just developed?
Sure. Yeah, the labor trafficking report was published by the Advocacy for Human Rights, and it can be found on their website. If you search for the Advocacy for Human Rights.org and then labor trafficking, you'll see the labor trafficking report there, which is called Asking the Right Questions. And then you'll also find the more recently published labor trafficking response protocol guidelines on that same website, and a self-assessment card that we created for victims and survivors to identify whether they may be experiencing labor trafficking here in Minnesota.
And so not so much an integration of sex and labor, but you're really focusing here on labor trafficking. And why is that?
That was because in Minnesota, we had a lot of research. We had a good system of response and a good body of practice and experience around sex trafficking and sexual exploitation, but there wasn't much at all, no research really, and also not a lot happening when it came to labor trafficking. A number of years ago in 2015, when I first came here, I have to think my years. So that was why we kind of had to start somewhere. And the report and the protocol guidelines both do talk about the overlap with sex trafficking. And then subsequently, in part because of that, the Department of Health was able to get a federal grant to help integrate labor trafficking into the safe harbor response. And that's actually how I got hired here at the Department of Human Services initially, because they had partnered with MDH, with the Department of Health, to try and improve the response to both sex and labor trafficking. And one of the gaps that was identified at that point when they were writing the grant was the child protection response. There really wasn't much of a child protection response that was established in law and no policy guidance at that time. And so they decided to partner, and that was how this position got created. So I've been able to work to not only improve the response to sex trafficking and sexual exploitation here, but also integrate labor trafficking into our child welfare system response.
That's excellent. So, some states don't even really have a child welfare response. I mean, it may be in writing, it may be written in the law, but they really don't have a system-wide response. So what is Minnesota's system-wide response, if you're able to even articulate it in a few sentences?
Oh, sure. I sure can. This is what I do every day. Now we're to my current work, Celia.
Yeah.
The response here in Minnesota is basically, Minnesota is a county-run and state-supervised child protection system. And so I provide guidance statewide and create policy and provide technical assistance and training for our county and tribal child welfare agencies. And so what they are required to do now under our state laws is all reports of sex trafficking that involve a child here in Minnesota are now considered mandated reports. And they require, if they are screened in as a sex trafficking report, they are required to be investigated by child protection. And the big change with that is all reports. That is not only family or caregiver household members. Mm-hmm. That is also the guy online or the friend at school that recruited you or the person in another state who's running a ring of 10 girls and boys, right? It's not only the family and household members. So that is our kind of what's required in the law. In addition to that, our law requires that all child crime victims get an offer of voluntary child welfare services. So sex trafficking has a mandatory response. Sexual exploitation and labor trafficking have a voluntary child welfare response. It's not voluntary for the agency, but it's optional for the family. They don't have to participate in it if the child or family feels that would not be helpful to them. So,
and do you think, is that a good idea? Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
As a matter of fact, our new response to sex trafficking went into effect in May of 2017. And so we have just really been developing this. I have co-facilitated a very large group of stakeholders statewide, including survivors and folks who are from tribes and from county and tribal child welfare agencies and law enforcement and service providers and medical folks, all of these different people. And we have debated that heavily. Does this make sense? Is this the right response? Does this meet the needs of youth and families here in Minnesota? And so we are a little bit constrained by the Justice for Victims of Trafficking Act, which created some changes to our main child abuse law federally, the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act, and requires us to now have this response to sex trafficking. When it comes to labor trafficking, there isn't a federal requirement, but we also honestly haven't had the ability yet at this point to change laws to make labor trafficking a mandated report or to make it a mandatory response. And so what we did instead was just created some policy guidance, which we published in April of 2019, that says labor trafficking is harmful to children. It hurts children, and this is how it hurts them. And so even though it's not a form of child maltreatment in our statute, it often coexists with many forms of child maltreatment, and it is harmful in and of itself. And so this is how you should respond to it if you already have an open case, and this is how you should respond if you don't have any other child protection concerns. So is it good? Is it bad? I feel like it's the best that we could do right now in Minnesota. And I was thrilled that we were able to have the buy-in to be able to even make that change, because previously there was not any child welfare system guidance or really much training at all when it came to labor trafficking response. Oh, just one other quick thing is that also did include, we didn't have any guidance previously about how to respond to foreign national children who have experienced either sex or labor trafficking. So we also included within that policy bulletin response for foreign national children who are encountering the child welfare system because of sex or labor trafficking.
Well, let me ask you, what would happen in this scenario? A migrant family comes into Minnesota legally, does work in the summer, brings their children. The children work all day in the field picking tomatoes. Is that labor trafficking or not? And why?
So, yeah, that's a great question. If you were a county or tribal child welfare agency asking me that question, I would direct you to our bulletin. I would also direct you to the 2-page labor trafficking screening tool that we developed for child welfare staff. And it basically breaks it down into 2 questions. And those are the questions I'll walk through with you in response to that scenario. One is the child doing some sort of work or other services for the benefit of another person? So in this situation, they are picking tomatoes. They're working on the farm all day, and the person who owns the farm is profiting, right? So yes, to question 1, they are doing work. But then you need to go on to question 2, which is, are they being compelled in some way to do that work? So are they being forced so that it would be forced labor? Are there threats of force? Are they being intimidated or coerced into it, right? Is somebody saying, I'm going to call immigration if you don't pick these tomatoes? I'm going to hurt your parents if you don't pick the tomatoes. Or I'm going to hold your immigration documents and not give them back to you unless you pick the tomatoes. So in this situation, the answer to that question, it sounds like from the limited facts that you provided, that answer would be no to question 2. So that would mean no, they would not be a labor trafficking victim. However, 2 things that I would say. 1, that doesn't mean that there's not labor exploitation. And there are state and federal laws that protect children, child labor laws that may be applicable. It's extremely complicated based upon the age of the child and the type of work they're doing and how many hours they're working and what the conditions are and so forth. So that would be still something to look at if you had that report come in and you were concerned about those children. The other thing you'd look at is, if a child welfare agency is asking me this, I'm thinking about concerns that might have to do with the fact that, are they getting adequate medical care? Are their basic physical needs being met? Do they have access to schooling? Those kinds of questions that could lead you down some other path as far as potential services or support that family might need.
And if the parents are saying to the child, not the employer, if the parents are saying, we as a family, that's what we do for 8 hours, is that exploitation?
Those situations get a little bit gray. And we have had some reports, some situations like that here in Minnesota with the parent being involved in potential labor trafficking. And that is so complicated because there are really, the black and white way to look at it is the letter of the law. So a lot of times my first recourse is, okay, let's go to the statute. Let's see, is this a violation of state or federal labor law, right? Is it actual labor exploitation by the law? And sometimes yes, and sometimes no. So if the parents are just saying, hey, this is just what we're going to do as a family, we're all going to work 8 hours. Well, the question would be, does the law allow, if the child is 7, does the law allow them to do that? If they're 17, does the law allow them to do that? And so that's probably how I would start to look at that. And then you have to look at all the specific facts around that. Is there somebody who's saying to the parent, your child has to work 8 hours along with you or XYZ is going to happen? There can always be many different circumstances that are playing into a situation where a child is is having to work.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, because that's been a question of mine that's kind of been in my head, in the back of my head. So in your work, I know that you have a partner. I know that you have kids now. So tell us how you really have work-life balance, and how do you do it? Because I have no idea, but please enlighten us.
Oh, Celia, it's hard. And some days I feel like I do have some work-life balance. Actually, 1 year into my role with legal aid, I married my husband. And then when we moved to Minnesota about a year and a half ago now, our two wonderful little boys moved in with us, and we adopted them almost a year ago now. It has been a wild journey of lots of family adjustments and changes for us. And, kids have a way of making you have work-life balance, because when they need to eat, or they need to be put to bed, or they need to get to school, it just needs to happen. So for me, I'm kind of a control freak. Let's just say that. And so I tend to hyper schedule things out to make sure that all the balls stay up in the air. So in addition to teaching the class at the University of Toledo, the online class, which I love, and doing my full-time job here at the Department of Human Services, I also just started this semester. I really wanted to understand better how race and discrimination and institutional racism impact our system. And there was this awesome opportunity to get a human services leadership certificate through the University of Minnesota Humphrey School, and the Department of Human Services would pay for a portion of it. And so I decided to apply for that and have been swamped the last couple months. So I don't feel like I have much work-life balance at the moment. Other than making sure I sleep enough and spend time with my husband and my kids, that's the best I can do many days.
Mm-hmm.
So
what has, having your kids really taught you about your advocacy work? And what has your advocacy work taught you about how to raise your kids?
That's a deep question. Our adoption is such a beautiful and complicated thing. And I think that my work over the last many years with individuals who have experienced trafficking or sexual assault, domestic violence, war crimes, all these different horrific things that can happen in a person's life, just that experience of walking alongside people who have experienced intense trauma and are trying to find the light on the other side has really prepared me for walking alongside my two little kiddos who have that background themselves. And they have not had an easy life. And so for my husband and I to walk alongside them and help them to feel that they belong and that they are a part of us, they are part of the LAD family, and that they are valuable no matter what has happened to them in their past. That is exactly what the survivors that I have had the privilege of working with have taught me. And that is what I'm still learning every day in my role, is that when an individual experiences trauma and shame and stigma and feels like they're isolated and rejected from society, from the community, the biggest thing that they need as they are trying to see the light at the other side of that is someone to just come up alongside them, to feel like they belong, like they are accepted, like they are a human being, that they matter, and that they have a purpose and they have an identity and a role that matters in this world. And so for them, and that's really, it's the same thing with both. And I think that it's something that is, I feel in my own journey and in both my personal experience and my professional experience, that is fairly universal for any type of trauma that a person experiences. That, that sense of afterwards, you are accepted for no matter what has happened to you. You are accepted and you have value and you can still contribute in the way that you want to contribute, no matter what your background is.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's why you're awesome. And that's why you do what you do. So
that's why I do what I do. Yes.
And so what are the best days? What's the best part about what you do? And what's the most frustrating part?
So in my full-time job in my work right now with the child welfare system. There are so many best parts of what I do. Recently in the last few months, my co-coordinator, Darian McCormick, and I have been going around meeting individually with as many of the tribal nations and American Indian community organizations and other collaborative American Indian bodies that we can find, going and meeting with them and really just sitting and listening. How does trafficking impact your community? What are the barriers? If a youth and a family experiences trafficking in your community, what do they experience as far as barriers? What does it look like when they interact with the child welfare system? And what do you want child welfare system staff to do differently? What do you want them to know about a youth that you serve that's part of your community that then is going to encounter the child welfare system? And going around having those meetings, really listening to people and making connections and helping them feel like they are part of this broader safe harbor movement in Minnesota and that we are doing this together, and then being able to take that information and we've been in the process for the last 2.5 years of writing a comprehensive best practice guide for child welfare system response to human trafficking and exploitation. So we have as of right before this call, currently a 53-page document, which does include 12 pages of appendices of practical tools that we've created for staff. But after coming back from those meetings, basically looking through and saying, okay, what do we need to add? What do we need to change? What did not resonate in our guide now that we've heard what they said? And really very real time, creating a better policy, creating a better response, putting it into training, sharing that information with the people who are on the ground doing the work. That energizes me, and I love that part of my job.
Wow. And so what's the frustrating part that you wish would just go away?
Well, sometimes there are things where sometimes it's just hard to get things done. I've developed a little bit of a reputation for being very persistent. If something needs to happen, just making it happen. And so sometimes I've only worked for the Department of Human Services for 2.5 years. So I'm still learning what the process is supposed to be. And sometimes I just make up a process if it doesn't exist or I can't find it. And then things get done. And then I find out afterwards that I maybe didn't quite do the process the way, I didn't follow the process at all. And sometimes that may have happened like more than a dozen times over the course of a year before I find out I've been doing it wrong.
Well, but it got done. It got done, right?
It got done.
Yeah, that's my motto. It's like I'll beg for forgiveness, but sometimes I don't ask for permission because it just slows it down to a crawl, and it will never get done otherwise.
I hear you. And, there is a reason for all of those streamlined processes. And once you know about them and, you've had a chance to talk with the people who are in charge of them, there is often still a way to get the thing done that you need to get done. Sometimes they're really complicated to figure out what on earth you're supposed to do and who you're supposed to talk to about it.
Exactly.
So that's the frustrating part sometimes. I mean, I work for an agency with almost 8,000 employees, so that's bound to happen. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I've finally warmed up to bureaucracy. And once you understand, once I'm taught the process, I can use it. But it's sometimes very difficult to take that first step in understanding and slowing yourself down to follow the process. So the process is in place for a purpose, but sometimes it is frustrating. So I agree.
Yeah. Be persistent, though. Be persistent. You can still get it done. So
yes. So Sarah, do you have any parting words, any advice for people who you've been in the trenches all over the world, actually. So I know that you have faced vicarious trauma and, times where you probably lose hope. What advice would you give to somebody to stay in the game? Like, what can they do so that they can do this work and do it effectively for a really long time?
So that is such a critical point. And whether you've been in this work for decades or you are just starting out, it is not easy. This is really important, but really heavy work. And I think even more so if you genuinely, the vast majority of people that I have interacted with within the anti-trafficking movement who have committed their life to doing this work, you really care about it. And so when you encounter situations where the system fails, or where abuse continues, or where the survivor that you've been walking alongside is back in the trafficking for the 29th time in the last year, and you have a way less than ideal harm reduction strategy that you're trying to follow with this person, it can be really discouraging and just feel like, what am I even going to do? There are certain cases, there are certain situations that are just the cases that I shall not talk about. They are just so bad. They are so discouraging. I cannot even go there in my mind. And so what do I do? Having a support system is critical. I am so grateful for humor. I'm really grateful for my husband. Honestly, doing this work before I got married was dramatically different than doing this work after. I have my companion with me, living with me. It just made such a massive difference to have someone who can just sit with you and be with you when it's really, really rough and make you laugh and know when it's time to just kind of move on and think about something different. And know when it's time to just listen to me lament of how horribly things are going and how much the system sucks, like you need somebody like that. And hopefully more than one somebody that you can talk to and commiserate with. The other thing that keeps me going is honestly the collaboration, the camaraderie, the closeness of not just here in Minnesota, but across the country and across the world. There are so many amazing anti-trafficking advocates that are committed to this and that keep doing the work and that get it. Like you, Celia, you have been a mentor to me for many years since I started this work in Ohio. And I know that there were times that were really difficult in some of the work that I did in Ohio. And you were there, as were other people, to say, okay, what's the next step? What's the next good thing that we can do? How can we help? Is there something that the community can do, that a church can do, that at the university, whatever, is there some way that we can do something together, or that we can just listen to how difficult this is? And so that's both the individual support system and the broader network. Don't do it alone. Use the network, and other people get what you're going through too.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you so much, Sarah. I think I'm going to end on that note, because it can't get any better than telling someone to have your support group, have your homies, have your people around you, have your nation. So I think I'm going to stop there. Thank you so very much. And I appreciate everything you do. And I hope you continue to do it. And I hope your husband and your children understand that they have a jewel in the crown, and that's you.
Thank you. Hey, and can I leave my contact information so that folks can get in touch?
Oh, for sure. I almost forgot that. I want to make sure that they can get all these goodies that they need. So how do they get in touch with you in order to get whatever they might need?
Yep, absolutely. So I'm going to give you a few different things. One is, if you want any of the information that I shared about the child welfare response here in Minnesota, or any of the resources that I mentioned, you can go to our website, which is www.mn for Minnesota, .gov/DHS, Department of Human Services, DHS/safe-harbor. If you put that in, you will see information about the shelter and housing here through Safe Harbor, and also a tab about all of our child welfare response, as well as a link to the upcoming conference that we are hosting in February of 2020. It is called Human Trafficking in Minnesota, Safe Harbor Systems Moving Forward. This conference is really featuring enhanced, kind of intermediate, advanced level services for sex and labor trafficking, as well as sexual exploitation and labor exploitation, and has an entire track on American Indian responses for trafficking and exploitation. And then we also have a lot of advanced content on collaboration within the anti-trafficking movement, collaborative responses, and outreach and identification. And so, and I'm thrilled to say we've got some amazing plenary speakers on those topics as well, talking about things like race and intersectionality and the missing and murdered Indigenous women's movement and how that connects with trafficking. And then we've got a panel of survivors from the U.S. Advisory Council on Human Trafficking talking about engaging survivor leadership in your anti-trafficking response.
Wow.
So that is all available on our website, or will be soon. We're in the process, it's funded by our federal grant, so we're in the process of getting approved so that we can make that website go live and put the registration up for folks. So in addition to that, you can find links to other resources and things on our website. And then also feel free to email me directly. I can connect you with any of the things that we have talked about today. And my email address is just my name, Sarah, with an H, .ladd, L-A-D-D, at state.mn.us. And please do feel free to contact me. I would be happy to speak with anyone or to send you resources or help you connect if you're trying to get connected with the anti-trafficking movement or with any of the things that I have mentioned today.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And thank you for providing all that good contact information. I want to make sure that people get connected. So thank you so much again, and continue to do the fabulous work that you've been doing.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much, Celia. Really appreciate you.
Sarah, you're bold, and I love it. My message to people out there is be bold enough to use your voice, brave enough to listen to your heart, and strong enough to live the life you've always imagined. Make bold decisions. Fight injustice, because as the saying goes, if you're neutral in a situation, you've chosen the side of the oppressor. Too many people stand back instead of stand up. I'm with Sarah. Are you with us? If you like this episode of Emancipation Nation, please subscribe and I'll send you the weekly podcast. Until then, the fight continues. Let's not just do something, let's do the best thing. If you like this episode of Emancipation Nation, please subscribe and I'll send you the weekly podcast. Until then, the fight continues.